This is Rabbi Nadia, and I am with Interfaith Paths to Peace. I am very excited to be able to welcome to Ben Sollee, who is joining us for our show Soul Food. Soul Food is a program that we developed this summer so that we would be able to find ways of nourishing our heart and spirit. And we are looking to do that by interviewing chefs, artists, musicians, writers, so that we can learn from them, learn from their spiritual process, learn from their creative process, and have opportunities to be inspired, and hopefully this can nourish our own journey and quest to bring peace to the world. So Ben, who happens to be one of my favorite musicians of all time, and who, when I first had the opportunity to hear him, it was, I think, his first concert at 21C about 15 years ago. And listening to him brought me to a place of clarity in discerning decisions in my own life. And over the course of the last 14, 15 years, I have been a very devoted fan. And every time I listen to him, I have a sense of stillness in my heart and spirit and clarity. And it comes from the incredible music and poetry that he brings to his music and performance. So Ben, it is a true honor to welcome you, and we are very excited to host you.
Well,
so I'm
that.
wondering if you can share a little bit about sort of your own journey towards music and towards finding your voice through music.
Yeah, well, would it be good to start that off with some music?
That would be an amazing way to start. If music is your way of answering questions, we are going to have a fabulous time.
Just face yourself. Feel the friction in your mind. Consider this opportunity to move against the tides. Whoa, such thoughtful maps. Of an ever-changing course, drawing lines where they never were. Whoa. Just to see if they might be long. Whoa, but you got a whole lot to give. You got a whole lot to give, yeah, yeah. You got a whole lot to give. Oh, yes, you got a whole lot to give. Just quit chasing your tail. You're tracking mud all over the place. No, don't you remember the voice you used when you spoke of precious things? Whoa, but you got a whole lot to give. Ooh, you got a whole lot to give, yeah, yes. You got a whole lot to give. Oh, yes, you got a whole lot to give. Ooh. So that was a song called A Whole Lot to Give, and hopefully gives you a little taste of where I'm coming from musically. I grew up here in Kentucky. I was born and raised in Lexington into a very musical family. My mom sang, and my dad was an R&B guitar player. Neither were professional by the time I was born, but they certainly loved performing. And there's a lot of music on in the house, and the house was full of instruments. On my mom's side, I had a grandfather by the name of Elvis Henry Cornelius, which is a super cool name, who was an Appalachian musician, played fiddle, banjo, mandolin, guitar, and sang. And I would stay with him on weekends, and he would teach me fiddle tunes on what he called my bull fiddle. And then, of course, being a cellist in school, I studied kind of the conventional music of the cello, which is classical music, and studied that through college, earning a bachelor's in fine arts and at University of Louisville. And that's kind of all the ingredients that I stewed and steeped myself in over time. So R&B music, bluegrass and old time music, and classical music. And then, of course, growing up in the 80s, there's a lot of video games, and I listened to a lot of hip hop as well. So all of that kind of growing up here in Kentucky in this wonderful crossroads of America really allowed me to kind of steep myself in all sorts of music. And I was lucky enough, or stubborn enough, depending on how you want to look at it, to think that I could make those musics on the cello. And my education was defined by a lot of struggle with educators and teachers who, always struggled to keep me on the rails of my lessons and disciplines, because I always wanted to veer off and explore and be creative and try new things. And that experimentation has carried through in my career. And so now I make music for film and TV. I'm working on a movie right now with Robin Wright, who you might recognize as Jen A from Forrest Gump, and making, art and curating events for different organizations like Kentucky Performing Arts, and really just trying to expand myself somewhat beyond music to be a storyteller and lift up the voices of the people that maybe didn't make it on stage as much as I think they should have. So spending a lot of time doing that right now.
I listen to you, one of the things that I'm struck by is being able to have confidence in yourself and your voice. So, right, like we're all in different ways steeped in lots of influences and steeped in lots of different sources. But too often when we want to stray and we get held back and told to stay on that course, it can really cause us to lose faith in ourselves and to kind of give up. And you talked about stubbornness. I'm using the word faith because I'm a rabbi, so I tend to choose words that are religious, even if it's the same meaning. But I wonder how you were able to hold on to that faith or that stubbornness or that desire to keep creating instead of giving in to the system that was trying to mold you into picking a side or being like, you're like, we're all like, education is about being put in a box and functioning as the cog in the wheel or whatever. And like, you've drawn from all of it and created this new path, and that takes this tremendous faith and courage. And I guess I'm wondering if you could share a little how that looks for you.
Well, I mean, I think I'm very fortunate and privileged to be able to have been able to pursue that path freely. I think that, in the industrialized education system, there are a lot of, scripts and conventions that teachers in the system there kind of work towards. It's just it's probably easier. I don't know. I've never been a teacher in a classroom, like an ongoing classroom environment, but I do know that from a very young age, when I would spend time in nature or get on my bike and ride, there was a feeling that I got of connectedness. Like there, it was really hard for me to draw boundaries in nature, draw boundaries in, time and life and relationships, because I found myself either resisting or just not being capable of saying, making a value judgment between this person or this thing and someone else. And I felt that way about music, instruments, the different genres that I listened to and that other people showed me. And that was, I don't know if any one person in my life taught me that. If they are, I haven't figured out who that is yet. I just knew at a gut level that there was a certain amount of connectedness, and I just refused to let it get compartmentalized. And I think that connects to like a foundation of spirituality I have. I mean, my parents growing up had both had really robust church-going families, and they were both pretty burnt out. So while we touched our Christian faith on the major holidays, that was about it. And so I did not grow up going to church, but I found myself feeling really connected to things, especially nature. And so I think that's it. And as I've grown up, I've, discovered theories like, around acoustic ecology, right? Where people study the health of nature by listening to the whole sonic spectrum of, creatures, bugs, birds, and other animals within the whole biosphere. And really understanding that in a healthy environment, everything has its own little spectrum that it can nest into, where it's not struggling to be heard, where it's not competing for its voice to come out over everything else. And I think as soon as I discovered theories like that, I found myself feeling really resonated towards that. And so I guess looping back to your question, I feel like my stubbornness can be described as a faith in the connectedness of everything, and just not willing to let anyone tell me that it wasn't connected, because I just felt so strongly that it was.
Well, and that sense of boundlessness and connection, it's definitely one of the things that mystics of all religions talk about, that and the challenge of living in a boundaried or finite world, when you're able to sense that which is beyond boundaries. And music definitely is one of those things that can transport us beyond this world, beyond our brain, because it emerges from the right and left part of our brain simultaneously. Mm-hmm. So it's able to bridge beyond the limits of the left brain. And I know that one of the questions that we're getting is that you have a lot of pictures or videos of nature, and that's clearly a big part of your spirituality and your creative process. I'm wondering if you could share maybe a song or a reflection based on that sense of connection.
Yeah, I mean, there's my music is infused in almost every way, shape, and form with nature and humans' relation to it. So kind of deciding on which song is an interesting chore. There's one song that I actually wrote for a motion picture called The Killing Season, which is not a particularly good film. It features an elderly Robert De Niro trudging through the woods of Appalachia. He's our hero in the movie, and a Bosnian, John Travolta. And in the context of the movie, they're both survivors of war. They were both soldiers, and they fought on opposite sides of the Bosnian Serbian War. And they find themselves in conflict in the woods in this cathedral of nature. And anyways, I did some spooky cello voice work for the movie, and they asked me to write a song for the film. And they knew that they wanted it to have sort of an Appalachian rhythmic fiddle, spooky in the woods kind of quality to it. And I ended up writing a song where I kind of took the idea of forgiveness, and sometimes, you know, all the barriers that we build up around it for various reasons. You know, maybe some of that is around wanting to having a vendetta, or wanting to get revenge, or just refusing to forget, or, you know, whatever those things are, and kind of taking that and using the ruggedness of nature to kind of talk about how to get to forgiveness. And so this song is called Letting Go. Well, it's a long, hard road through a rough edged land to the softest part of a man. You can lose yourself in the deep, muddy ruts worn through by the pride of a man. Ooh, yeah, yeah, yeah. And there's rusty signs overlooked on the way to the heart of a troubled man. And you can lose yourself in the deep, muddy ruts worn through by the pride of a man. Oh, worn through by the pride of a man. But letting go, letting go, oh, letting go. In a lonesome field, there's a wild-eyed mare tied to the weight of a man. And she once ran free with the wind in her hair, breathing hard for the love of a man. Oh, breathing hard for the love of a man. And she won't let him be, and he won't let her rest till he learns, Lord, how to forgive and let her go. Let her go. Let her go. Forgiveness is a falling leaf in the changing of years, and as it settles down to the cooling ground, let it go. Let it go. Let it go. Let it go.
That was so incredibly amazing. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for listening.
And the process of letting go and forgiveness is so challenging. And I really want to dive into that. But first, there was a question. What was the name of the movie? I think it was like something about killing, which was not overly spiritual.
The movie is called The Killing Season, and it's nominally it's an interesting movie. It's a thriller. How about that? It's a thriller movie. It's entertainment in that way. It's but it has an interesting message about war and all that stuff.
Well, and as I'm listening to you talk about that, it occurs to me that, like, as you get asked to participate in movies and create a song for a movie, you have to learn about the movie, I imagine, and then find a way to connect emotionally and spiritually to be inspired enough to create a song for it, right? Like, because I'm sure that the title of The Killing Season isn't like, oh yes, I'm going to create some music for that. But then as you dive deeper into the music, the plot, then you get that process, which is really, I imagine, like a practice for living too, right? Like being able to go beyond the surface to find that which speaks to spirit.
Yeah, I mean, it is not always the art that inspires more art. Sometimes it's the story of the peoples, and the director had a very clear message that he was trying to send with this movie about war and about the trauma that it causes, and how people process that or don't process that. And I connected with that, on a lot of levels. And I mean, I think right now, just talking about trauma, there's so many people going through trauma, and just lately and through this time, I've learned that when I'm in trauma, experiencing trauma, I go into like a hyperactive state. And other people that are in my life go through a hypoactive state. And respecting those responses as both valid and important is really essential to caring for each other, and also understanding that they're in conflict with each other, and like, me being hyperactive doesn't necessarily support the person in my life who's hypoactive. So I need to be sensitive to that, and that push and pull, tug, forgiveness, letting go, all that sort of thing is part of that for sure.
Absolutely. There's a couple of questions that are coming up, and if everyone wants to add questions.
Number. Here, let me look it up.
In the chat room. So one of the questions was, what was your Enneagram number? Which, if you don't know, Judd is the master Enneagram spirituality person. So he actually hosts, I think, every Friday a special program where you can learn more, dive deeper into Enneagram numbers. So I don't know if you know it or not.
I'm looking at my results, and I don't know how to read this always. I am a 2. I'm a type 2, and I don't know what my wing is. I know that I have a wing. So my first highest score was 2, and the second high was 7. So I'm a helping enthusiast.
A helping enthusiast.
Yeah.
Well, you definitely are boosting spirit and bringing support. And Judd has determined that is a perfect number for you. So you've got his stamp of approval.
Really get into the Enneagram scores and some of the other personality assessments.
Well, and I think that those personality scores, I mean, to me, it's a way of trying to understand the diversity of experience, right? Like you were talking earlier about how in trauma, you go into a hyperactive place and other people go into a hypoactive place. And it seems like so much of conflict in this world is not realizing that other people's reactions to trauma are different than our own. You know, everyone has some kind of trauma that is leading them to whatever dysfunction is causing trouble. And we have difficulty showing compassion for that because we don't always understand. And I guess to me, the power of music is that you're able to strip away some of those details that sometimes get us caught up into, well, my version of the story is more whatever than someone else's, so that we can all connect on the deeper emotional level. And that to me is the path towards compassion, is when we can actually feel the feelings beneath the content of someone else's story.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of conversations right now in what we all recognize as a very divisive time about how to bring about more togetherness, or a sense of togetherness. How do we bring about togetherness around systemic racism? How do we bring about togetherness around climate change? How do we bring about togetherness around capitalism, period? I think that there is a lot of thinking about how do we, not reverse, but nudge the trend away from division towards togetherness. Because if we are to, or are going to better able deal with some of the challenges that we're facing as a human race, we're going to need to feel like we're together on it. And while science and data sciences and a lot of technology and stuff are wonderful at helping us understand on a head level what's going on, the size and scope of water pollution and access to quality food and food desert environments in the urban environment, it doesn't necessarily spur us to action because there's a missing piece in our heart. We tend to take action on the things that we care about, that we have an intimate knowledge around. Wendell Berry talks about it as affection, right? He talks about in his Jefferson lecture that it all turns on affection. And by that, he's saying that when we can all have something that we care about, that we have affection for, which he defines as having an intimate knowledge of that person or place or thing, then we will protect it. And I think that music and the arts in general is the medium by which we can help grow affection. And in many ways, that's my mission. It's hard to necessarily define a mission as an artist, but for me, my mission is to help grow a greater sense of togetherness. And I do that through my music. I do that through experiences that I create for folks online and in person. I do that by mentoring other artists and communities and organizations. I do that through my work at a nonprofit called Canopy that I work at on a daily basis, which helps businesses incorporate a social or environmental mission to have a positive impact on the future. It's all about kind of leading towards a greater sense of togetherness.
So there was a question about, is there a song that represents or expresses your hope for the future? And the question that I was thinking in my head is there a song that you've written in recent days in response to all of this that might be a bridge towards a sense of connection or togetherness? That might be the same question. It might be a different question. It might be two songs.
Much of my creative capacity lately has been going towards the community. So I've been helping other artists and I've been helping other organizations and I've been writing for, other people's work. So I haven't necessarily made anything of my own around what's going on in these times. And I think that's interesting. I don't
Yeah,
exactly know why I haven't been able to produce a piece of art around it, but
that is actually really interesting.
yeah, I think, yeah, I'm just putting everything. I mean, things are really challenging with my family right now. We have a newborn at the house who's 4 months old.
Oh,
There's not a lot of sleep, and she's our third kid.
congratulations.
You know, and my wife is, you know, going through like some autoimmune stuff, so like she needs a lot of extra help. So I think just kind of emotionally, I'm tapped.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably where that's coming from. But yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we've learned, or that I'm reminded of in this quarantine times, is that the things that really give us nourishment and yeah, and energy and motivation to live is being together with others, is having someone to trust, is having access to a green space to be able to take in sunlight and have quiet moments. These things don't really cost money. They are the things that are around us and accessible for most of us pretty often, that we tend to race by. I know that I was certainly spending a lot of time racing by those things, and still do, but it's just a good reminder that the things that often give us the most joy are the things that don't really cost anything. And so one of my very favorite songs is by a songwriter named Gillian Welch, and she's got a song called Everything is Free that I'd love to share right now.
Awesome.
Everything is free now. That's what they say. Everything I've ever done, I'm gonna give it away. Ooh, see someone hit the big score. They figured it out, that we're gonna do it anyway, even if it doesn't pay. Ooh, I could get a tip jar, gas up the car, try to make a little change down at the bar. Or I could get a straight job. Yes, I've done it before. Never mind that working hard is all I'm working for. Whoa, see, everything is free now. That's what they say. Everything I've ever done, oh, I'm gonna give it away, give it away, give it away, yes. Oh, see, someone hit the big score. Ooh, they figured it out, that we're gonna do it anyway, yes, even if it doesn't pay. Whoa, whoa, love. Ooh, whoa. Every day I wake up, I'm in a song. Ain't no use in running round. I'll just stay at home and sing a little love song. Just my love and my myself. If there's something that you want to hear, yes, you can sing it yourself. Whoa, 'cause everything is free now. Yes, that's what they say. Everything I've ever done, I'm gonna give it away. Yes, see, someone hit the big score. Yes, ooh, they figured it out that we're gonna do it anyway, even if it doesn't pay. Yeah, yeah, Isn't that a pretty song?
That is a gorgeous song.
I love Gillian Welch and Dave Rawlings. They write some good stuff. But I just love that concept that everything is free. And it's funny, I hadn't sang that song in the context of this conversation, singing that middle verse about just staying at home and singing a little love song. Just suddenly the context makes the song feel totally different. Just stay at home.
Yeah, your face totally, like, light just flew through you as you sang that. And it's, I was thinking about how you shared how right now, in the midst of all of this pandemic, as we're all feeling helpless watching the world kind of struggle, how your creative force has been channeled towards helping people and mentoring and writing for others. And so I was thinking about that when you talked about giving away and you were singing that giving away, that process of giving of yourself. There's this idea in Judaism that talks about how, like, when Moses was face to face with God on Mount Sinai, he was wordless. He was in that place beyond words of spirituality and connection. And the Bible says, afterwards it says, God says to Moses that you can only see acharai, you can only see after me. And I was thinking about how sometimes in extreme moments where the world is changing so fast and so rapidly, our brains can't catch up fully. And it's only afterwards that the creative process, that words, that music can find itself. But in the moment, just that need to give and connect is what is real. And so I was reflecting on that as you were sharing a little bit from your perspective.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to hear the art that comes out of this time for me and for a lot of artists. I mean,
yes.
I'm expressing a lot of my creativity right now through problem solving. And I think that at some point, when there's more stability, it might feel a little bit safer to make art. Potentially. We'll see.
That's so interesting, just the notion of safety as being an important part of creativity, and that makes total sense, but I never really thought about that as necessary.
We see that, right? We see at times of great upheaval in society, the art kind of dries up because people either don't feel safe to make it, or their just lives are so unstable that they don't have the time and capacity to make it. And that's why we think of these places in the world and certain times in human history as like real renaissances or like a time of flourishing. And usually that's a time of peace. And typically that is a time where, there's stability. And, as people talk about change theory in general, like they talk about stabilize before you ask people to change. And that's going to be an increasingly challenging thing to offer to people. So I think that it becomes really important on the spiritual side to find stability, however you have it, whether that's in motion or at rest, stuck at home. And so that's the work that I'm trying to do right now, is just trying to find that place and get centered, so that I can make. And
what helps you get centered? Is there like a song, or is there, I mean, I'm sure that like your family is probably a nature you've shared as well.
Well, yeah, maybe. I mean, right now my family feels like a constant, which is wonderful, but also feels like a little bit of a destabilizing force,
Sure.
just because it's in flux.
It is.
So,
and by the way, there were messages that
like a lot of
thoughts, love, and energy are going to you and your family right now.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think like a lot of parents, it's just a real struggle to find balance right now with that. But what helps me get centered? I mean, always just having an intentional breath really helps. I think that performing the actual act of playing music helps me center. There's really nowhere you can go. Music doesn't happen. You can't like squish music and it still mean the same thing. Like you can fast forward through a movie and still kind of see what's happening in the film. Like maybe you're missing 10% of what's happening, but really you can kind of see the characters and moving through. You can glance at a piece of artwork and maybe you don't get the full deep meaning, but you get the gist of the artwork. You can't do that with a song. You can't like fast forward through a song and it, or a piece of music and it be intelligible. It has to happen at its own time. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's one of the wonderful boundaries that playing music has provided to me, which is maybe one of the reasons why I've stuck with it for so many years, for such a long time.
So I do want to make sure that there's chances for more questions. Here are a couple of questions. One, and I love this question, did Prince ever hear your terrific version of When Doves Cry? And then there are a couple of other questions, but maybe we should let you answer that one.
Certainly.
Do you know if Prince ever heard?
There were people in Prince's life that were connected to me and my music that may have sent it to him. I don't know. I was never in touch with him about it.
I mean, it's an amazing version.
What a gift his music and his presence was to the world. Amazing.
Amen.
Made a lot of good music.
So, question, what are you learning, or what questions do you find yourself asking right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, we've discussed some of these, I think. What am I learning is just how to find balance in an unstable time. And then, what questions do I find myself asking? I mean, I find myself asking, how do we go forward? From the standpoint of racial justice, I mean, it's hard to see a path forward without, significant transformational reparations. So I find myself thinking about how can that be structured in, our community, our state, our nation, and how can I help contribute to that? On the standpoint of the environment and climate, it's really that's the overwhelming point for me right now. I have, from my experience working around mountaintop removal strip mining, I have an understanding now that economics are powerful, and that, as we get closer to them, companies see the opportunity in change, people start demanding more change as things get tighter. So I have a faith in that. but this is just a little bit different scale. So again, I mean, the question I keep asking myself is, how can I use my talent and my art to bring about a greater sense of togetherness? And, you know, there's a number of ways I'm thinking about doing that. I mean, some of it is through, you know, bringing people together on to create live experiences that are diverse and really inclusive and uplifting, and that represent a contemporary look at our place in the world here in Kentucky and the greater Ohio Valley region. I find myself thinking about how can I create potentially like an accelerator program for artists to help them get a leg up in this time, because a lot of our arts training is developed for a much older model of music. Honestly, a lot of the arts training is still, you know, centered around a patronage model of music. And while there's some of that going on right now, really artists need to consider themselves more in an entrepreneurial fashion. And I find myself asking the questions of how can I help create opportunities for them to learn that and connect with people who can help bring their incredible voices and art out into the community, because I really feel like that's our best shot at creating togetherness. I mean, other than actually getting physically together in spiritually powerful places. Like if I could take each one of you on a walk through Red River Gorge, I really feel like we would connect around that place. If I could take each of you to India to experience, you know, walking the streets and the people, you know, prostrating in the streets, and the incredible sense of jugaad and people making with what's around them and feeling like I've got everything I need. Well, but you don't have anything. They're like, I've got some rocks and I found this old sign. I leaned it up and I've got a home. I don't know that that's just, but you know, they found their way to be centered, and that is spiritually powerful. So um, I find myself asking a lot of questions right now, and maybe that's why. Maybe that's why I haven't made as much art.
Well, in the spirit of questions, and actually in Judaism, we say that chokhmah, wisdom, comes from the power of your question, from the koach of the ma. So I wonder if anyone on Zoom has any questions that they would like to share or ask. One question that we always ask is, what is your recipe for peace? And I feel like you've been answering that in many different ways already, but as we come close to the end of our hour, if there's a song for peace that you have, or a recipe for peace that you've been reflecting on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make too bland a dish, but I really feel like my main ingredient, with maybe some garnish and some seasoning here and there, is just listening. I feel like it's an incredibly powerful tool to just listen and truly take in other people in your life. And I actually have a song that I wrote in Bernheim Research Forest for the opening of a sculpture called Earth Measure, which is this incredible earthen structure made of limestone by artist Matt Weir. And the structure is meant nothing more to locate someone in the middle of a meadow, forest plain, and there's a big parabolic disc carved into this limestone. If you stand in the focal point of that disc, you get an almost infinite picture of what's out in front of you. It's based on, you know, wartime technology of people listening for bombers, but the result is to take that focused listening and stand in that spot and just listen to nature. And you can stand there, if the park isn't busy, through the cycle of a day, and just listen to all the bugs and the creatures, and it's just an incredible experience and really grounds you into that place, that specific place. If you were to have the sculpture set up somewhere else, it would sound completely different, but it would still probably provide a certain amount of centering for that. So maybe that's a song that I can wrap up on if there's not any more questions. Cool. Well, thank you all so much for listening to me babble and figure things out.
No, thank you so much.
Me being vulnerable will help encourage you to do the same with someone else in your life.
Amen. That is definitely part of our vision for this program. And one comment was, your honesty has been transforming. Oh. And I think that the vulnerability that you bring to your music, or clearly also in this conversation, is one of the things that has always centered me for years personally. And I hope and pray that we can bring some centering to our corner of the world so that it can help us be more firmly rooted in compassion.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you all so much for having me. This is a song of mine called Learn to Listen. Settle down, settle down. Take it easy on me. I ain't willing to lose, but I'm willing to admit I was wrong. 'Cause there's only so much time in the day. There's only so much that I can say. Learn to listen. Learn to listen. Learn to listen. Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a picture in your mind of what you used to be. Ooh, in the hunger of ambition is a wish that you won't feed. Ooh, in the hum of the highway is a distant sense of speed. You got your hammer and your chisel. Ooh, it feels like old technology. But there's only so much time in the day, yeah, yeah. And there's only so much that I can say. Oh, learn to listen. Ooh, yes. Learn to listen. Oh, learn to listen. Whoa. Weave your way out from the city. Fold yourself back in the hills. Find your church out in the meadow. Ooh, and remember to be still. And just listen to the quiet, that wild rippling sound. and you find that you're here. Yes, and you find that you're now. 'Cause there's only so much time in the day. There's only so much that I can say. Oh, learn to listen. Ooh. Learn to listen. Oh, yeah, yes. Oh, learn to listen.
That
Thank you for
leaves
your
me
beautiful hands.
spellbound. So I don't even have words. It's so amazing. Thank you so much. Comment that was made is a gift I'm taking away today is the gift of example and presence, meaning the influence we can have on others just by living our best lives and being willing to witness and name. And witness really is about true listening. And when I think about one of our goals for our program at Soul Food, it's really about helping people to listen and hear deeply and hoping that that can nourish and transform. And I know that you've really done that. It almost seemed like as you were playing that song, or the songs that you've been playing throughout the hour, it felt like you were hearing them in a new way as you were singing them. And I think that, I don't know if that's true or not, but it seemed like it is. And when I think about how music takes and creation takes on a life of its own, that's part of what allows it to become enduring, of enduring value and connect to people.
Yeah, it's true. You make art. For those of you all that are listening that make art or are just creative in your lives, you make these things, whether they be strategic plans or they be, songs, and over time, new context, right? Like, who knew we'd be in the times that we're in right now? And the meaning shifts. There's a new perspective to view something from. And pretty much every time I sit down to play a song, there's a new perspective. Something has changed in my life, or there's a new person in my life, and that gives me just some type of fresh perspective. I mean, there's a line in that song that is the hunger of ambition, a wish that you won't feed. That song hits real hard right now. Like, feeling like things are so unstable. Like, I have ambitions. Like, how do I feed those right now? How do I nurture those? And so, everything, context really changes everything. So I really appreciate the conversation. It was helpful to me.
Well, that's a kind blessing. We got a comment from Facebook that this has been someone's favorite IPP episode so far. I personally feel like today, this hour was one of the highlights of my summer. So I want to thank you so much for sharing of yourself and your vision and creativity and music and presence. And the courage to be vulnerable, because I really think that that is a huge part of what can bring peace and healing and help us connect to one another. And I would also love to talk with you about some of the other artists that you have been mentoring. We would love to feature them on our show, our program, because that's part of our vision as well, is to give voice to through our One River Many Wells program, where we get to explore the different religious and spiritual practices within Louisville, or whether it's Soul Food, or tomorrow afternoon, Boardroom Buddhas, looking at how we translate these spiritual principles into our daily life and maybe even transform corporate America from the inside out. you know, you can't blame
We'll
a
have some
couple of clergy for having hope and faith, and that's certainly the core of Interfaith Paths to Peace. But thank you so much for
Yeah, it was
sharing
my
with
pleasure.
us, and thank you all for joining us. Tomorrow morning, if you want to start your day, we start our day every morning with devotional, whether it's yoga, which will be tomorrow, or poetry, which will be on Thursday, or we have the Buddhist community on Friday, or the Baha'i community on Saturday. So we hope to experience you all, and thank you all for joining. Ben, there are not enough words to say thank you.